Okay.
Well, we've got some samples. I'm looking forward to this. Right, Ross, you're going to have to do what Angus does. It's probably the most important part of Angus's job on the podcast. Clap us in.
Not good enough.
Nah. And a second one. I need two. Give me just two back to back. Welcome along to the Whisky Stories podcast with myself, Graham Collier. We are back in the Athletic Arms in the snug. We have changed our position for anyone who's watching on the YouTube channel. We are sitting in a completely different area. Different part of the room, but a different feng shui. Able to do this because Angus isn't here. It's his mum's birthday today.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Mrs. Shepherd. Mrs. Shepherd, Nicola. I hope you're enjoying yourself. Angus, I hope it was worth missing this because the man beside us has got loads of sample bottles, which I know you'll be raging you've missed. He loves a freebie, does that,
Angus is not here, so I'll bring an extra sample. So it's
exactly. He's a heavy
excited for this as well.
Well, indeed. Well, first of all, Ross, let's go through what we are dramming, as is tradition.
Back in Athletic Arms, what you will see in some of the socials is the new Sniff It,
Sip It, Score It, 60-second whiskey review. You've got to say it quick. You've got to say it quick.
I can't because I don't want to slip up. There's already enough bloopers.
Sniff it, sip it, score it. Sniff it, sip it, score it. Sniff it, sip it, score it.
And so I've got a dram that I'm very familiar with, which is Glenkinchie.
Oh, yes.
Well known that I built the Glenkinchie Distillery, Brixton North.
What date was it built? Did you build it?
Actually, it was built in... Well, the original Milton Distillery was in 1825, but renamed Glenkinchie in 1837. So 1837 is when George and John Ray decided Glenkinchie, the Kinchy Burn, that's what we're going to name it after. Obviously, it's now tarted up as a Johnny Walker experience, even though very little of it goes into the core Johnny Walkers.
There you go, eh? But he's not bitter, is he?
I'm not a master blender. Emma Walker, I think you're great. And so I've got the 12-year-old Glenkinchie, which is nice to visit back to. I tell everybody who doesn't ask that I worked there before, so it's one of those things. It's nice to revisit the dram. And I've got Dom's recommendation, Big Dom, whiskey guru here.
He's our whiskey guru, isn't he?
Yeah, I think Kev kind of gave him that title because he cares so much about the back bar there. And it is a undisclosed Highland from Thompson Brothers. First fill bourbon. I think you kind of seen this bottle, thought of me straight away. Apparently he'd mentioned it the week before that I was meant to be recommended to try this by the bar staff and they didn't tell me.
Right.
He was awfully upset.
Oh no.
So we came in today. He's not working today, but he was behind the bar when I arrived and said, "This is what you're having," and I've got to say it's a delight. Maybe he said believed to be Bal Blair. I've not spoken to Phil though, to be honest, so I've not spoken to the Thompson Bros to ask, but it's got a beautiful,
lovely,
floral custard, like vanilla pod, brilliant nose to it, and so I'm looking forward to tucking into that.
Superb. And we've got a wee guy in front of us nodding his head. So are you going to talk about that later on, or do you want to talk about it now?
So for the cameras, they bobble his head. I do have a wee special dram with us. Now this is something that we mentioned months ago. Right at the start of the year, I think we were talking about how this year's a good year for if you want to buy whiskey, you can actually now get some good deals on auctions. If you're not going for crazy stuff, if you want some old blends, if you want something unique, you want a dram to share with like-minded folk in whiskey, you can buy stuff for reasonably cheap. And I mentioned what I called a fairly ridiculous collection. This here, for the viewers or for the audio listeners, I'll describe this.
It's a belter.
The Han Shin Tigers 2003, which is a Japanese Central Division baseball team.
Wow.
Okay. This is their celebration bottles for winning the Central Division in 2003. Now, the baseball team in Japan were owned by the people who owned the Kurosawa Distillery.
Okay.
And this is where it gets quite exciting. Kurosawa Distillery closed in 2001. And it was really sought after. Now, this, we actually shouldn't know what's in this. People have sold it as a set of Kurosawas. Each bottle has a custom bobblehead and player jersey name and number.
All the bobbleheads different.
All the bobbleheads are different. Like this is what Mr. Yagi looked like. And so this guy here was a one club man. He's 59 years old.
Good on him.
Wow.
And he played for them from the 80s all the way up to the early 2000s. It is a 37% Japanese blended whiskey that only has one word in English on the back of the bottle, which is Kurosawa.
Okay.
So we're going to get this poured at some point in the podcast once we've had these and see what we think.
He's nodding away nicely. He's probably the only person that ever nods along with what you say on this podcast.
And so I almost had a terrible mistake. I almost bought the full set of these. I think I was about £600 deep into a bidding war, which I don't have. I've got a wife. I was not consulting what I was doing at the time. I'm glad I didn't win that. But they have sold the whole sets of 12 different players has sold for £2,500 previously. Fraser Souness got this bottle.
Lovely guy.
Week of my wedding for 25 quid on auction.
There you go.
And I've been speaking about it for so long.
Brilliant.
I don't think I've ever been on a bid less than 50 quid for it. So that feels great as well.
Unreal. Well, there's plenty of it, as you said. You know, I was looking at the auctions this week, in fact, as we're recording, and I think there was one was Whisky Hammer. We're doing there was an auction just finishing off, and it was close. I didn't see what I ended up going for, but at the time, with maybe about half an hour to go, I think there was a old Pulteney 17, which was Mark Thompson's.
Yeah, and Shane fucking loved it as well.
Yeah, and that was going for 85 quid, which I believe
it's been gone for years.
Yeah, it's probably yeah. So not a bad dram there.
So what have you got yourself? Now you've got over my Japanese Central Division champions in 2003.
Well, I've got to be careful here because as we're recording this, I am in the red zone. My wife is ready to pop with our first baby. Our daughter is soon to be born. Maybe in fact, this is getting edited and put out tonight. So as you're listening to this, if my wife has gone into it, I've had to rush back, and this is one of the reasons why I've got to be very careful, because I'm actually sitting here with a Guinness Zero,
which I've heard is really good.
It's fantastic. You'd love it with a bit of blackcurrant in it as well.
Okay, I would argue the best non-alcoholic beer on the market.
Definitely. We were doing our sniff it, sip it, score it. I went for a dram which I rated quite low for £2.50 at the Athletic Arms. You can't complain. It's sitting. No, I still. It's sitting here. It's sat for a while. It's got fly in it.
Obviously, yeah. The thing is,
it could have improved.
Potentially, but also if this dram had cost me more than £2.50, that fly would be getting hooked out, and I'd be finishing it. But because there's a fly in it, I might just be saying, you know what? Plus, I've seen our guest, who we haven't introduced yet, has one of my favourite things I listen out for when a guest arrives into the Athletic Arms to record an episode with us is if they clink on the way in. Because if they clink on the way in, then that would mean that they have brought some lovely samples with them. And ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome onto the podcast Jake Adcock. Jake, how are you?
I'm tired, but good.
You just finished working.
Ross's chat will do that.
I've been here 20 minutes, so Chris, I was working earlier. So
nice.
Straight from the office.
So glad to have you on. I haven't just had our first blender on, and Pete, and also what a fantastic reaction we've had online from that. Really interesting, I think, for us to talk about an independent blender and then go to probably one of our favourite drinks companies in Ian Macleod Distillers, because all we do in this podcast is talk about I was going to say Tam and I wanted to say Glengoyne, so I went with Glen Tam.
Yeah, Glen Tam.
Tam Dew and Glengoyne.
And
obviously now we had Rosebank.
We've had loads.
We're ready to get Isla Distillery up next year as well.
Well, we just keep mentioning it as much as possible, but the problem is, I think the reason we haven't been sponsored by anyone at Ian Macleod Distillery is because of Fraser Souness's episode, and also Ross just keeps calling the Tam Dew distillery a dump.
It is a dump. It's meant to be a dump.
And this is why we won't get sponsored. This is why we can't have nice things. This is why we can't have nice things, Ross.
What's nice about it is like where all the washbacks are. It's like an 80s swimming pool. Like it's all tiled, but tiles are falling off and stuff. It is really there.
It looks like a Soviet era swimming pool. It really is. Yellow walls. And
I mean, it was one of those Charles Dogs right afterwards. So it was like an old building.
Has it got pagoda roofs?
No.
I'm not even sure. I couldn't tell you, mate.
Actually, I've been there multiple times.
Me too.
We've talked about this in the podcast.
The still house is mock-it in the way that it's actually clean, but massive spirit safe, and the stills are quite dark, almost like we're having. So it's just unique.
And also
it's not built for visitors.
The only Watt 3 drams we've had on the podcast where somebody put a Watt 3 dram in of an example of a dram that they didn't enjoy, which was the 50-year-old cask, and it was like, and that's a deliberate thing to show that was, and that was Fraser's as well. But Jake, you are here. Your title is assistant blender.
Yeah, so I went from when I started, I was blending assistant to I've now jumped up to assistant blender. How do we swap at the end of last year?
That's a wee bit the office assistant to the blender.
Yeah. Curtis has given me enough for that my whole time, but
is that for a particular? Is that because it's Ian Macleod?
Yeah.
But is that for a particular distillery or brand that they have?
No. So we So there's just 3 of us, believe it or not, for everything we do.
3 assistants or 3 blenders?
So there's John, who's his official title is Malt Master, but he's the master blender, really. There's Emma, who's my boss, and she's just titled as blender, and then I'm
you're in there. You're in there.
Wow. So I'm the baby blender of the bunch.
But what an amazing opportunity, and what a unique job in whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say first and foremost, it is the best job in the world. Like, do you know, like, when you think about what we do, and, you know, like, people be like, we don't really do it. No, we do it. Really? I'm not fucking around. Like,
are you based in Glasgow? You got a kind of blending in Glasgow?
Right. So we're based in Broxburn.
Okay.
So West Lothian. So it was funny actually, when I was first getting into applying, when I was at uni applying for jobs, I got offered a couple of things, but there was almost no whiskey company that you could work for and live in Edinburgh, really.
Yeah.
You know, although it's Central Belt, it's either out the way or, you know, like for instance, Chivas is over in the Barton. Yeah. But IMD is one of the few companies that you could actually live in Edinburgh. I mean, even hell, you could even get a bus to the office. People do that. And, you know, I was, as soon as I finished uni, I was cracking my brain because I was, 21, 22, and I couldn't drive still. And I was like, you know, if I'm going to work in whiskey, I've really got to learn to drive. Yeah. Because, like, if I'm going to distilleries and things, it's going to be such a nightmare. So I crash coursed it in like 8 weeks and passed. Brilliant. And then went through. And then got a job with a company that I actually didn't even know.
So what you say, you're talking about university then, what was your journey into whiskey? How did you get into whiskey first of all?
Do you want the full shebang?
We've first and foremost, where do you hail from? You're from the north, right?
Yeah, I don't sound like it, but I am from Aberdeen.
Great English. It's until you say Aberdeen.
Aberdeen.
Yeah. To be honest, I'm like the least Doric person going, to be honest.
Bridget Don or something. Can it be Bridget Don?
No, I'm
fair place from a wee posh area.
That's what I call it posh, but I'm from a place called Cove, so it's like...
I know Cove.
The Cove Rangers.
Been a Cove.
You know Cove Rangers? Oh, mate, man.
That's a conversation for another time. But, so you Aberdeen study, did you come down to Edinburgh to study?
Yeah, so I left school, did 5th year, I was like, you know, 6th is just going to be an absolute sky if I don't want to do this. So I came down, I got into uni straight away at 17. So left, came down to Edinburgh, did mechanical engineering, which I've heard a lot of engineers end up doing.
Yeah, honestly,
half the podcast guests have done some kind of engineering.
Yeah. Or they've worked behind a bar.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Spoiler alert.
Holy shit, you've done both.
When I was I was 17 for first year, 18 second year, kind of 18 turning 19, I then started working in bars. Worked in bars for basically the entire time I was at uni. And when I came to do my dissertation for engineering, this is going to get quite nerdy for a second, but in engineering, my favourite subject was always thermodynamics. Okay. And that's like transfer of heat and things.
Yeah.
And because of that, heat exchangers were my jam.
Okay,
brilliant.
Love it.
I love warehouses, mate. Whatever turned you on.
Oh, well, I've got some stories, so I got into massive heat exchangers, and so my dissertation I was doing it on heat exchangers, but they gave me a list of topics, and I was like, none of these are really tickling the pickle. So I couldn't really be arsed with it. So I was like, you know what, can I come up with my own one? They were like, yeah, sure. So I actually ended up doing it on distillation.
Amazing.
And what I did was I basically optimized a distillation plant at the time, or distillery, you know, whatever, and I calculated all of the waste energy you get through all the processing from start to finish and through heat exchangers, and if you took that waste heat, where you could put it to and what you could do with it.
Did you come out of Port of Leaf Distillery? Is that the idea? And make a better distillery? That's really interesting.
I did something with, they were called heat batteries, essentially. It was quite new technology at the time. It's actually getting used now, but it was essentially where you take heat, you put it into a very well insulated box that has a material in it that takes quite a long time to heat up, but when it swaps phase, that stores so much energy in there. So as long as you store the phase and keep it insulated, that's just like a big battery.
Amazing.
Essentially. Wow. And then whenever you need that energy, you can pump it back out again. So I then estimated how much you could save on costs and things.
And so you're already a whiskey drinker at this point? Is that
no,
something?
I fucking hate whiskey. Absolutely hate this stuff. Could not stand it. The entire time I worked in bars, big cocktail bartender, so I thought I was hot shit and stuff.
Where were you working at the time?
So I worked in Revolution.
Well, you were a student, I know. You'd about you, mate? You're good looking boy.
What I want to say is it was I think the most fun I've ever had. Yeah. I worked there for only maybe 8 or 9 months, but God, it felt like a lifetime. It felt like a lifetime. A lot of mums.
It's vodka revolutions in Edinburgh, isn't it, right?
It just closed. So we went to the leaving party there, and it was dire. It's awful. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Well, it's closed now, so.
When I was cocktail bartending, what I would make cocktails with everything, I refused to make a whiskey. Someone came up and asked for an old fashioned, be like, you can get fucked.
Yeah.
So what turned you then?
So COVID, like everything.
Oh, basically, another COVID converter.
So obviously I did the distillation thing. At that time, didn't really think about whiskey, but I graduated into COVID. So coming into that, there was obviously no jobs and things. I didn't really like engineering by the end of it either. And I did what me and my flatmate both decided to do, and we took a year and just worked in a bar at the time, but we did the Panic Masters, and I was going into brewing and distilling, and I got accepted in, but I fully went with the mindset of doing beer.
So this was at Herrick University then?
So I was at Herrick before.
Right, okay, yeah.
And the reason I went back is because of the alumni discount.
Okay.
That saved you. Saves you 30%.
Alumni discount, brilliant, eh?
So on that tuition fees. So I went back to do brewing and distilling, but had full intention to do brewing.
Yeah.
At this point, I was living on the Royal Mile, actually.
Wow.
And brilliant time to live on the Mile during COVID, when there's no one out there in the streets.
Yeah, I bet.
And I left just before kind of everything started opening up again, and it was awful afterwards, so good for that. But I lived above, there's a shop, is it called the Whiskey Trail, I think it is?
Yeah.
One of the slightly more generic style ones. I literally lived above that. And there was one day we were going through, it's one of these things where I started watching the guys at Whiskey Tribe on YouTube. I'm not sure if you've
great
seen them.
Great YouTube channel.
I started watching them, and I was completely encapsulated by the stories of Scotch. Right? And I was like, you know what? Fuck this. I live above a shop. I'm going to get something. So I went down.
You're a Scotsman and you're doing brewing and distilling.
Yeah, I was like,
a bit of peer pressure internally there.
I was so infatuated by all the videos and all the stories. I was like, you know what, let's just give it a go. So I went down and I bought my first bottle down there, and it was Farkless 15. And I took it back up and I opened it a bit, and through all the videos, and I was like going through tasting note videos and things. I was getting really obsessed with it, and I was like smelling it, and I was like, I hated the taste of it. Yeah. But it was because the burn, the alcohol, I couldn't take it at the time. But I loved the smell of it, and I got more and more into it, and it took me about halfway down the bottle, and I was like, I'm quite into this, and I went down again, and from watching the videos, they rave about Irish whiskey, so I went down and I was like, have you got any Irish whiskey? And these guys were like, no, but we're like, the closest thing, and they gave me a Hazelburn. Okay. And at the time, smart. I was like, well, this is an Irish whiskey, but now knowing triple distillation, yada yada. And then I got to that, and then I was like, okay, you know what? Tesco's on Club Card has, fucking actually things for I think my best deal I ever got was like a Cardew 12 on. They were, what's it called when they're just trying to get rid of it? Reduced to clear, and I got a Cardew 12 for like £19 or something. Yeah. and then from there, it was
that would make any love whiskey.
Well, that's the thing. So
I think for people that are listening as well, it's worth saying. Although you've spoken about already what you were studying and finding this, love for wanting to do brewing, writing a dissertation on distillation. So you've got an interest in drinks and loving bartending, but. You're the youngest blender I know. You're 25 years old, which probably audio listeners wouldn't think listening to you, which is a credit to you. I think in whiskey, the older you sound, often the better that is. Because it almost gives you this credibility, because people won't believe.
What experience
in your young 20s, what do you know about whiskey kind of thing? Even if you are Scottish, it's something you want to learn about. But that's amazing. And then so you met more like-minded people as well, or maybe already had people that were really into whiskey.
Well, so I guess this is where I guess I'm a bit of an amalgamation of everyone you've ever had on, to be honest.
So you end up in a youth system.
Program.
Because COVID, blah blah blah, starting to get into whiskey. Fine. My birthday comes around, and my partner at the time is like, I've lived in Edinburgh this whole time, and I've never done a Scotch whiskey experience. Right? Never done it. And we're like, we hear this thing about a barrel, so we're like, okay, let's go do this. Right?
The barrel
ride. So we go and we do the barrel ride. We get a tour, and at the end of it, I was still so new and giddy about whiskey. I was like, this is brilliant. I was like, this is amazing. But the one bit of me, I was like, you know what? I could do this. And at the time, I was, I was getting a bit sick of hospitality, the late hours and stuff. I just couldn't be arsed with it anymore. And I was like, I could really do this.
And it is something that lots of people that are doing brewing and distilling end up working.
Yeah, there's so many of my pals who end up brewing it afterwards. And funnily enough, a job is applied. I think they're always hiring, basically. But there was a job advert, went for it, got it, and then was in there while I studied brewing and distilling, and while I did the whiskey side of things, and it was. I'm a sweet alumni as well.
So who did you work with anyway?
So I worked with Cody very briefly at the start.
That's one box ticked.
I went to who else? So Ali was my boss. Ali Baxter was my boss. I've then got a good story with Alex Thompson. I'll get to that.
It's a good few.
Who else from Sweden have you had on?
Well, actually, that's probably it for the guests. And then obviously you worked with other people that are still in the industry now. You worked with our mutual friend Curtis, who's now at Scotch at the Balmoral.
I was out with Curtis the other night. He wined and dined me. He absolutely sugar daddy.
They're doing quite well.
Mate, those fucking boys at Scotch. You see the cash they make? Oh my god!
It's the tips.
It's the fucking tips.
He still owes me about 14 million pints, and every time he gets paid, he texts me and says, "I love you, by the way." But that's good.
So you're working at Scotch Whisky Experience,
and if you have a wee X for whiskey and you go to the Scotch Whisky Experience, you're going to end.
Oh, that's it. I mean, so where does it go from there then? Is it just is it a straight jump from Scotch Whisky Experience into working
naturally
for?
You always knew you were going to go for production because of what you were studying, or
basically. So when I did the SWE, when I was at SWE,
your time.
You could very clearly see there was people who were like into the history and into the dates. That is so not me. I mean, if you talk to any of the guys I was out with SWE, I'm like, I was all into production, and that can be quite dry, don't get me wrong, but it's all I was interested in, and being very real with people about, whiskey is very romantic, but my favourite bit was always talking about grain sites, and I was like, you see these big copper stills are beautiful, they're fun, and I'm like, you go over to bloody North British in the corner, mate, it's a fucking factory. That was my favourite bit.
But it's so important.
Exactly.
And that's like, it's not romantic to most people,
and that's the thing. It's like
romantic to a blender, certainly.
I mean, it's fascinating when you look at it, and like how many times it was Cody Reynolds we talked about it on his episode. We've talked about it so many times with different people. It's like there are different areas of whiskey that people love. See, I'm the opposite. I still struggle to go through. I could struggle my way through it. In fact, I probably wouldn't be able to do it.
If I started you off with water, yeast and barley, you'd find it really hard to end up with spirit.
But if you were to say to me, start the process from that to that.
I've got a really good way to remember it.
All right, go for it.
Oh, this is good.
I call it for the
Yeah.
So malting, milling, mashing, fermenting, distillation, maturation. For the
malting, milling, mashing, fermentation, distilling, and maturation.
There you go.
There you go. That's fantastic.
It's one of those things that I think it's easy for me when I first met you, Graham. If I wanted to tell you on a whiskey, I would tell you where it is, who owns it, and a wee bit about the cask, a wee bit of that story. I would almost wine and dine you in conversation and make it romantic for you.
That's what you need to do sometimes.
What some people want is, a lot of people are really into the whiskey and they want something they can't get anywhere else. I say, well, these people make 100,000 litres a year capacity, and that would be really unique and curious.
The lighter, was it? They got that
full lighter, semi-lighter. What are you looking at?
There you go. That was one of the questions. If you join the ever-growing Whisky Stories Facebook group, we do the mystery distillery competition for just for a bit of fun, and I think it was the Lauter system which distillery first implemented that German invention into it. So, and any ideas?
No fucking clue.
It was Tomatin, wasn't it?
Tomatin. But the big boys.
But the thing is, like, there's so much that you can add in to, and you're right, Jake, as well, is when you go to a Scotch Whisky Experience, I think what's great is that you could have probably 10 different tours from 10 different tour guides who will give you a completely different experience as you're going round, because you might, if it was the three of us that were to deliver a whiskey tour at the Scotch Whisky Experience, mine would all be about the romancing of it, the stories, maybe a lot about maturation, what wood can do, and warehouse chat, really, with a few interesting facts. yours would be very heavy on the production side, the distillation, and then Ross would be on. Well, what would you?
Everything, mate.
Ross's tour would take 3 times as long. We'll sit down and I'm going to tell you everything I know.
Well, it depends who you're in company with.
Yeah, exactly.
If I'm in company with a farmer, I want to talk about barley. If I'm in company with a blender, I want to talk about, honestly, I want to talk about casks, I want to talk about vattings, I want to talk about consistency.
And in the end, you'll just end up talking about
Isn't that the usual thing to get excited over? Isn't it amazing how consistent you can be? Or that was so inconsistent, it was amazing. It's such a funny thing to talk about with blenders, because really, and especially we're talking about your role now, Jake, it is probably quite different to how people imagine it. Yeah. What's the day to day?
We're not got to how
I'll wrap you around. I'll very quickly wrap you through. So, I was doing brewing and distilling, happy days, and this is actually where things kind of wrap around. Distillation. Dissertation comes around, and they start offering out other projects. Now, there's one specialty project that comes out for whiskey with Ian Macleod. Funny enough.
Wow.
And what the project was basically pitched to us as you're going to design a blend, you're going to experiment on some things, and it'll get released as a product.
That's fun.
So
you could do that as a dissertation.
So you think Cody Reynolds' dissertation was good? Wait till you hear this. So I got into it. I got it. So there's 4 of us. Me, my pal, who I'm still really close with, another friend, and another friend of mine actually, who's now working at Compass Box, who I've seen recently. But the 4 of us get together, and the brief was, we're going to design a blended whiskey. It's going to go into virgin oak, and we want to separate you into 4 subjects. You're going to each experiment on different things, combine it together, and we'll finish it up. So we had someone do time in casks, someone do malt to grain ratio, someone do something else, and then I did char level of the cask because it was new oak. And then, did the dissertation, got it all together. I won't go too in depth in what we actually did, but we took the best bits of each of ours, combined them together, sent the details back over to IMD, and they then made it, and they put it into cask. And then a few months later, when it was finished, we then went over to Glengoyne. We did a whole big photo shoot, a big thing, a PR thing, and then it released as a product. It sold out. It was a single cask release, sold out in about a week.
Did it?
Yeah.
What were you talking for a bottle for that?
30 quid.
Wow.
30 quid of a student's blended single cask whiskey. That's pretty cool.
So it was specially labelled. Yeah. So I've got 2 sealed. I've got 1 open.
Nice.
But it was. Specially labelled with Ian Macleod. It's called like the Blender's Room, something like that. It has the Harry Watt logo on it. It has the full breakdown of each of what we've done.
Wow.
On it and things. So that was super cool.
Really cool.
Yeah. To be able to what's blown my mind here is that this has all happened within the last 4 or 5 years.
I did that in 2022.
And that's, but your whole whiskey journey, to go from somebody who literally was struggling to drink a bottle of whiskey, and not in one go, of course, so to go from that to where you are now.
You should thank the Whiskey Tribe by the sounds of it. It sounds like they kept you entertained enough.
I know, it's so funny actually. I messaged, I had a real kind of highlight moment on LinkedIn, and I posted about I got my promotion, and I posted about it on LinkedIn, and Daniel Whittington, who's that, liked it, and I was like, how the fuck is this guy liked it? And I was like, this guy's literally like my whiskey hero, he got me.
They're like one of the best whiskeys.
I've seen it. I know, absolutely. So, but what I'm just thinking is like, he likes your post. Here you are.
I know that.
On the Whiskey Stories podcast, mate. Come on.
So he liked it, and I messaged him about it, and he was very super. So that was amazing. Yeah, that was one of the best bits.
No, I mean I take it as part of your dissertation. Then does that give you an automatic application into working with Ian Macleod Distillers?
Well, you think, but
actually something happened to come along, and you were
yes, right. So I got very lucky at the time, but I was applying to jobs coming out of that, going through the works, and at the back of it, I was like, you know what, actually, I'm overqualified and underexperienced for everything. That's the issue. I've got a master's degree, but I've got no experience in it. So I was then looking around I was like, I just need to do something. And at this time, Ali had just started back at SWE, and he, I then went up to him. I was basically, gave him this bit of a spiel. And he was like, let me go talk to someone. So he went and spoke to Alex Thompson. And this is how I know Alex.
Right.
And Alex was like, fuck it, come on. He was like, come over to Glenturret, do a week over here with us for free.
Just work it. You got to work
so I did that. So then Alex was like, you'll come stay with me. I'll take you to work every day. you'll come do production with us.
Oh,
obviously,
wow.
won't pay you anything, obviously. But he's like, but you'll get.
But what an
experience
opportunity at a massive distillery, not massive in terms of production, but massive in terms of.
And so you get your lunch. Did you get your lunch?
Me and Alex went to it. Was one Michelin star.
Was it just one?
Just one.
It's only the one.
But I actually have a funny story about that. But I did a week of production over there, but what was actually really good was the distillery manager, Ian, amazing guy, but he set me up with basically a couple meetings every day with the head of every department within Glentoran.
Really interesting.
So I got to see every side of the business, all how it works internally, from marketing through to production to health and safety.
And also a very talented team.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the name of the gentleman who just went to Glenrothes, who was managing director at the time.
John Laurie.
John Laurie, and who's a titan of the whiskey industry, and being there at that time is quite special, really, because that's going to be one of the most significant periods of Glentorran's history.
I remember meeting with him, and he was teaching me about artificial scarcity and stuff. That was really interesting.
There you go.
So did that, and then was applying to jobs. A couple appeared. I actually went for an interview at Macallan. So I was up there for a little bit. I'm kind of glad I didn't get that in the end, because I as much as I love Speyside, I'm a city boy.
Being 25 and living in Edinburgh is class.
Boy.
I
fucking love Edinburgh's the best.
I love Craigellachie for 24 hours. I really do. It's one of those things. And even then, I'm quite niche loving.
It's a big commitment, isn't it, for young people to get work with.
We spoke to Conor O'Keefe as somebody who's in operations, as an operator, as a distiller. And he couldn't believe that he would have got a job in Edinburgh or even in the Central Belt in that line of work. And so it's very much similar, even if you wanted to be... Obviously, you were working in production somewhat at Glentoran as well. Now you're doing blending, which is quite different. But the idea of getting a production-based whiskey job in civilization. It's not what whiskey's about in Scotland. It's meant to be out in the middle of nowhere. So
I've really got to give a huge shout for Alex and Ali, to be honest, because Ali put me in touch with it, and without Alex I probably wouldn't. That experience really then set me apart.
It says a lot about characters like that who have all the knowledge, who have all the experience, who really genuinely, if you have not listened to it, listen to the Ali Baxter podcast. He genuinely loves seeing young enthusiasm in whiskey and giving them that stepping stone to give them a career in whiskey.
It just goes back to, like we've said it, I've said it so many times, where the whiskey industry itself is just so keen to help everybody within the whiskey industry out. Pete from Woven last week was just saying that. It's like, the gatekeepers that they have to deal with to try and get inventory so that they can actually start creating the blends, their casks, are really, really nice, helpful people. And I think that the industry is very good and helpful to people who they probably, and people within the industry, are
unlike anything else, really.
Talking up the industry or adding value to the industry, and also being reciprocal as well.
There's never negative competition.
And I think that's when you look at things like that, is that there will be people there will have been somebody else who got a hand up by somebody, so that there's an element of, I got my hand up, so it's important that somebody else gets a hand up when I'm in a position to be able to get to them.
Volunteer your time to say, this is what I want to do. I will go and work for free. It's one of those things that actually, in different circumstances, it's still a big sacrifice.
I will say, you were very good about it as well. They were like, I mean, I took it as a holiday, to be fair, so I still got paid for it. But
you have to live with Alex Thompson.
I did. The amount of whiskey I drank with that man in his fat. Oh my god!
And he's a big man.
I can't keep up with him.
For sure.
I remember the next time I saw him, actually, it wasn't too long. I hadn't seen him for ages, and we were out in the pub, and I met him. He had quite a few. It was a rugby day, and if you know Alex, he's a big rugby guy. And I went, and he's not a big rugby guy. He's a big guy.
He's a big guy.
And I went to go. It's the first time I've seen him in ages. He was, oh my god! He picked me up like I was a fucking little toy, threw me around. And I'm 6 foot, and I'm like, I'm not the smallest person in the world, but God, Alex. Athol Highlander as well.
And so people that are listening, they've listened to somebody who started their company and kind of blended their allocation of casks. Well, Pete's story is that I had 6 casks to work with, and I had to create a core range. You're working for Ian Macleod Distillers, who are a massive global company, massive whiskey company, also massive gin company, Edinburgh Gin, etc. What does a day in the life of an assistant blender look like?
So I would always describe us as we're probably the smallest of the big guys, biggest of the small guys. I think is what they would put us. But I mean, that's what I'm
very
saying.
big in malt whiskey now, particularly, especially in your period of getting interested in whiskey.
There's a lot of stuff we do that people don't think about that we do. And like, yes, we have big malt brands out there and stuff. But like
several blends
bulk,
as well. And,
bulk is huge for us. Blends massive for us.
There'll be market whiskey. I'm imagining that will only be in the Far East.
Like we've got blends that sells like so much you couldn't even think about it.
Where are you putting any in India?
Well, we've just opened a distillery in India.
Oh, I've actually
just opened a distillery in India called Una, and so our director was out there recently with Robbie, who's the distillery manager of Glengoyne. So they were literally just came back.
Robbie Hughes.
Robbie Hughes.
Where about in India? Do you know?
No idea.
No, that's fascinating. Una.
Yeah,
I'll look that up. No, but I mean, it's fascinating when you actually look at it from the Scotch whisky industry and you say about. Like I say, the connection for myself with India. There's my wife; she's Indian. You go over there and you see these brands of whiskey, and you're like, never even heard of this one. Don't know where that's come from.
The volume of
and
it's hard to comprehend. Yeah, so I poured a wee bit of 37%. It doesn't. I'll be honest, it doesn't give a lot off in the nose, gentlemen. 37%. We don't know the age of it. It was bottled 21 years.
So are the Japanese laws different? You can bottle before.
In 2003, they must have been okay.
That's quite nice.
And you'll see quite a lot. Even back in the day, I mean, I drank Springbank bottled at 37% before, but bottled in the 60s or 70s. Sure. And so the laws nowadays are obviously much tighter. I remember learning fairly recently about the rule that whiskey has to be matured in oak. I don't think that was a law until the 80s.
Yeah.
And so we've been doing it forever. But it's one of those things
I mean, we don't, obviously. But you'd be surprised the amount of, I think, old whiskey casks that, I mean, but it's how do you tell?
Yeah.
How do you know?
Yeah.
I mean, back then you just got sold the cask, right? So
that's exactly. Yeah.
I had a chestnut finished whiskey very recently, a Swedish. Anyway, lovely. Anyway, sorry, dive back in.
When you're looking at working with Ian Macleod Distillers, when you're blending and stuff like that.
So you're about to talk about the different brands. Sorry.
For me, explain just very briefly, because Ross is pains me to say it, the expert on the podcast.
Never an expert.
but when you hear people talking about blenders, a lot of people will instantly think, oh well, that'll be making the blends for Ian Macleod Distillers. But ultimately, what you've got to understand is that unless you're drinking single cask whiskey, every whiskey is blended, isn't it? Every sort of what you see behind the shelves or behind the bars on the shelves, and if you're seeing a Glenfiddich 12, it's a single malt, but it'll be blended with lots of different.
It's a vatting of thirds of cask. You're right, Ashka.
So what does that mean for you then?
So, as you're saying, from day to day, it's really, I would kind of describe it as, I don't know, man. IMD is so good in the sense of what we have going on. We're in the perfect level of we're not so big where like all I do is smell, and all I do is sensory. I like to be involved in quite a lot.
So
of
a lot of quality assurance, and
I would say it's probably about 50% sensory at least.
So sensory being
smelling stuff, right? And then I'd say probably about 20% admin-y style things where there is some computer work and there is some although I can make a whiskey, I've then got to make sure that the people who bottle it know how to make that whiskey, and then there's also, because we've got warehousing on site, there's probably about 20 to 30% of we're out there as well.
Just looking for casks and drawing samples and stuff.
Well, so this thing, what I'd say, I'm probably really proud, at least for us, like when we come in to make, say for instance, a Glengoyne 12 vatting, we'll look at all of our stock lists across all of the warehouses we've got. We'll be like, okay, we'll take a bit of this, bit of this, bit of this, bit of this. We'll move it all into Brock's, where our office is. Yeah. And then all the casks will arrive. So say at Glengoyne 12, we're looking at about 150 casks for vatting of that, roughly. And we will go and sample them ourselves. And we don't just get samples given to us.
So you're actually going out.
We get in the dirt.
And so you'll already have a recipe breakdown of, we want, for example, 80% bourbon hoggies, second fill, etc. 10% first fill butts, and so you'll have a kind of litre.
Yeah. So we bring in like a big quantity of that recipe, and then we'll pick and choose from there.
Right. So when it comes to this is it when you're creating a blend of, or a new product or something like that, are you? It's basically arithmetic, isn't it? If you can suddenly say, right, we'll take 20% of those types of casks and 60% of those types of casks, and then round it off with so many of these casks.
And you think about the size of the cask.
And if you're taking if you've got a sample of, let's just say a 700 ml, 70 cl bottle, you just then say, well, let's just do that on mass to the mass that you've got. If it's 20% of that, then you just try and work up.
I mean, it's even easier for us. I mean, we'll just have a list of all the casks. We know how much is in each cask roughly.
Yeah.
You know, we'll do a bit of estimation on losses and things, but we'll make it on like a 50 ml scale.
Yeah.
Right.
So we've got a pipette. We just do a little bit of math on the scale we've got, and we can basically so you don't know the amount of Excel sheets we've got. We'll just do a little drag and drop, and it can basically tell me just from how much is in the cask to what I want to put in it. It'll tell me that, okay, I need 1.5 ml of this, and I'll just go through all the casks one by one, add it into a bottle like that, and then we'll taste it.
It's interesting because I was doing like an impromptu tasting on Sunday. In fact, it was the wife was having a baby shower, and auntie's aunties were all together, and family and stuff like that. So all the sort of blokes did what blokes do and got together and sat and drank. Except I couldn't drink because I was driving and on red alert, as I've said. So basically, my uncle had said, "Oh, you're doing your whiskies podcast. Do a wee tasting for us." So and there was novices in there, and I sort of took through went through a wee collection in the flat that I just needed emptied bottles, to be honest. Took them through a single cask and a few other bits, and that's what we were talking about, was like blends. Well, there was a blend in there, but there was also, we were chatting about how, well, that's a standard blended 12-year-old whiskey because it's a single malt.
It's got malt and grain.
No. It was just it was a single malt. But I'm explaining to them
multiple casks.
It's been blended and things like that. And one of the big questions that they came up with, because there was a single cask as well, and what they said was, well, how do you get consistency? And how can a company like Ian Macleod Distillers, like let's just use Tamdhu or Glengoyne or somebody like that, and say, how can they every single time produce tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of bottles of a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old, whatever it is, and have it taste the same every single time?
Yeah.
There's no really easy answer there, because the answer is it will never be the same.
Yeah, right. So
to your palate, I'll let Jake answer, but the answer is that it actually isn't.
Yeah.
Fucking let him
answer. What I would say is, if you look, and I would argue this to do it to any big whiskey ever. You look at a whiskey that was bottled in 2010, and you look at it in 2020. You're going to find a difference.
How big a difference?
It's not big.
To your day-to-day palate,
exactly, nothing.
No difference.
But
if you are a sad 1999 whiskey person like Jake and I, we love a pre-2007 Glenfiddich 12 next to a Glenfiddich 12 now. Is there much of a difference? Is it bottled differently? Is the strength different? Probably not. But it is different.
Right.
And it's hard to explain. It's different, but it's not different.
But what I mean to say is, like, so there is things as well as, like, I guess in theory, if your blenders change, I mean, people's palates are different ultimately. Like, so if your blenders change, your style will change, because people tend to blend with how they enjoy, so that's what you then find. But on top of that, there's no getting around the fact that wood quality has waived over years, and stock, ultimately, you can get what you can get, but things like bourbon casks, the price of them has skyrocketed and crashed again. They're skyrocketing right now, and they're still up really high. So I will guarantee you there's distilleries out there that maybe can't afford bourbon casks anymore, and so they're going to have to compromise, and they're going to have to make differences. So without being crude about it, you can only do with what you've got. But you can do the best.
And
that's one of the stories. Like,
even if the recipe is
the recipe is the same, but the quality of the casks might. And that's interesting. Like the story of Tamdhu with Ian Macleod purchasing Tamdhu, and Mike Brown talked about the decision for Ian Macleod to purchase Tamdhu was made so much easier when they saw the inventory of stock that was just sitting in warehouses of those sherry casks, that they could suddenly go, hang on a minute here,
we've got something here.
Look what we've got to work with. And when you go back and you look at the size of a company like Ian Macleod Distillers, they can hold a lot of power in the sense of what kind of casks that they can get. And I suppose that the bigger that you've talked about, the Macallan, and you've said yourself, Ian Macleod, they're the sort of weird guys of the big boys and the bigger guys of the weird boys. But it must start to become a challenge, particularly when you speak to people like Peter Allison from Woven, and you speak to other independent bottlers who are getting casks that are and how are they? And
for like I know the prices of casks that sell and stuff, and indie bottlers, I feel for them.
Yeah,
I really do.
And the quality and consistency is nothing
exactly.
there. But that's sometimes a nice thing about an indie bottler is that the beauty is in the inconsistency there.
But you're strong-armed into buying parcels, and you don't know what parcels you're getting.
It turns up, and I've spoken before about meeting indie bottlers. Lovely meet you. I've got something for you to try. This is a 50-year-old X that I bought, and it's turned up below 40%.
Yeah.
And when they bought it, it was labelled at 41% or whatever. And so it's a risk you have to take. I think it's really difficult. And somebody like Glenfiddich at 21 million litre production.
Yeah.
Brian Kinsman will allocate, I need 4 million litres this year for the 12-year-old in 8 years' time. And it really is, it's a recipe, it's medical, it's really precise. With Ian Macleod Distillers, you have quite a diverse portfolio in terms of you're using peated stock, unpeated stock, all the rest of it. And what I would like to know, because I find this genuinely mind-boggling, is when you're doing your recipe for, say, a Glengoyne 18 or whatever, in the lab, and is it arriving at your bottling strength? Are you drawing samples from casks that are then arriving at 43% or 46%? Or are you drawing samples of casks which are all going to be delicious, straight out the cask, single cask? How often are you tasting them and going, that should be a single cask, that should be a single... No, because that's what I feel like I'd be saying that every time, because you know the value of your stock as well. Yeah,
I mean, what I'd always sugarcoat everything I'm going to say here with is, I'm only about a year and a half in the industry. And I'll say stuff, but there's people who know way more than me, right?
Of course.
And we'll bring in all these casks. Obviously, they're all cask strength, theirs. But like, we sample them all ourselves. We'll then bring them back to the lab. We'll then nose every single one. Now, when we nose, this is probably a fairly big thing. We nose at 20%.
Yeah.
Everything.
You nose it at 20%.
20, yeah.
Right.
So I would argue, but I would actually say, so I get a lot because a lot of my friends now are like, oh, you're a blender, what's this? And they fucking throw it under your nose. I'll say drinking for pleasure and drinking for work are two very different things. They're completely different. Yeah. So like, if I'm analysing a cask, it takes all the fun out of it. You know what I mean? Like,
of course, you're just... as Angus would say, you're putting a lot of liquid in your mouth. pieces of liquid in your mouth.
So we bring it all down to 20% ABV, because I think, if we look at 150 casks in a day, that blow through your nose, right? Yeah. And we still palate things. We don't swallow, we'll spit it out, but we still palate, because especially peat is for me at least, way easier to pick up on the palate. Okay. So very low levels of peat on your palate is easier than on the nose.
Wow.
So we'll look at a bunch of them, but if there is single cask, we'll absolutely single them out, and then we'll hold them aside, we'll reserve them, we know what it is. I would generally say, right, 80% of whiskey is absolutely fine, right?
I love that.
10% of whiskey is really great and exceptional. 10% of whiskey is really fucking bad.
Yeah.
Right, and that's how I break it down.
And you've got to try and find that. And what you're looking for is probably that 10%
you get bad thing, and people. And this is the thing. You guys will never see this, and I would like to bring this sort of thing to the limelight. But like, we get trained in looking out for off notes in whiskey, which are things like sulfur and things like sourness and things like TCA, which is cork. So if you ever had a corked wine, it's the same idea. You get it in whiskey because it's a fungus that happens in wood. And we get trained to look out for these things. And then, so we, a lot of actually what we do is when we're doing a Glengoyne 12, it's actually, no, that's fucked, and keep them away.
Wow.
And then only blend with the good stuff, and then with the bad stuff, we'll do with what we have.
And that could be a full cask.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It must be difficult, and I'm imagining, here's the thing, Graham, some of the problems are what you think you're getting to work with doesn't arrive. So you're going, okay, first fill hoggy, it's X amount of age, or how old it is, and you're like, okay, I'm expecting 210 litres, and it arrives in just 120 litres.
Or even like,
what are you going to do?
Or you could get a bad note, and like that whole cask, that whole cask could just be written right off.
Yeah.
And then does that then mean? Now this is what's interesting as well about a blender and about a distillery, a single malt, is trying to explain to somebody that the age statement on the bottle is the youngest whiskey that's being used in that. So for a lot of people, they'll think it's a 12-year-old, so every single cask that's been used is 12 years old.
Good point.
What we know is that the youngest whiskey that has been used is 12. for an example, could you give us an indication in any of the sort of blending that you've done if there's ever been much higher, like in a 12-year-old, have you ever put a much higher older whiskey?
You have not given me a perfect segue to the whiskey I poured you.
Fantastic.
Right, okay? You couldn't have wrote this. You literally couldn't have wrote this. But I poured something for it. I'll tell you what it is later, but I'll tell you it's a 3-year-old whiskey.
Okay, really?
I'll tell you, for
legally.
It's 3-year-old whiskey.
3-year-old whiskey.
Okay.
It's a Tamdhu, first and foremost. Right?
Oh, wow. So my favourite distillery in the portfolio, Tamdhu. My father's favourite distillery in the world.
For a sherry tart, a former sherry tart. I'm a big fan of the Tamdhu.
So it's sitting at 56.8. Yeah. So I brought you in just as it is. Now this was something a bit cool and a bit unique I did, where I was up at Spirit Space Out this year for the big event, and I was kind of hosting the... We did a blend your own section for Tamdhu, where we gave them 4 single casks and the guys then blended them out and stuff. So I was there kind of hosting that section. Now, I was really appreciative. I mean, people pay a lot of money to go do that sort of thing. And I wanted to do a bit of a love letter from the blending team to the people who were there. But I wanted to make a complete surprise. I didn't. The only people I told was Sandy McIntyre, and Ian Weir, who's our the brand manager. Okay. So I told them to. They both approved it. I was like, 'cause I'm not going to do it if you don't approve it.
And Sandy would say aye to most. Exactly. I want to say Sandy McIntyre is my favourite distillery manager in Scotland.
Right,
legend.
Right.
I made a wee very custom blend of Tamdhu, as we were talking about, to bring up. And at the time, everyone tried this stuff, everyone did the blends, and then I brought this out as a wee last dram, and everyone appreciated it. So what this actually is a one-off. So what I used in this was casks that don't exist anymore. So I used the old cask samples to make this. So what I have is this, and then maybe about another 100 ml left.
Okay.
Well, that's quite a label you've got on there.
Yeah, I know, right? I'm very persistent. And so this is my take on Tamdhus, like a Tamdhu decades.
Okay.
Essentially. So I took Tamdhu from the 60s down to 2020. And blended something that kind of highlighted everything. Now, I could have just made something that was old for the sake of being old, but I really wanted to try and make something balanced and unique. But I will say straight up, 30 to 40% of this is 40-year-old plus Tamdhu.
Yeah. Wow.
But it's technically got that 3-year-old, which makes it a 3-year-old every single malt.
And is that like that? Was it Compass Box that did the... Eduardo talked about it on one of his...
maybe the collectivism or something
It was a 3-year-old blend, but it was... like hundreds of pounds.
There's quite a lot of people have done it now, or you've done like maybe it'll have a vintage on it because they don't want to say it, or, Exactly. But that's really fun, and that highlights kind of.
That's
if you put that on a label in a bottle and you put it on a shelf, 99% of whiskey drinkers would go 3 years old. Not touching that. Not touching that. Yeah. Even if you didn't put an age on it, I'm not interested. Yeah. But this has actually got some of the oldest Tamdhu that we'll ever come across. But it's legally a 3-year-old. And that's a really good point you make, Graham. I didn't think about that.
No, this is the thing. It's like when you... like these are all the misconceptions that people can often have with whiskey, is the fact that, first of all, I mean...
Yours is great.
One of the guys on that wee tasting that I was doing on last Sunday thought that every whiskey... it couldn't be whiskey until it was 10. You break it down. It's 3 years in a day in Scotch. Aye, but 3-year-old whiskey is obviously not going to be any good. But one of the bottles that I had there was a Glenwivis 2019 release, and you're saying, well, it's a 3, technically a 4-year-old for when it was actually by the dates it was done. But the point is, then it got us onto the topic of, well, hang on a minute, because what you could do is you could fill it. You could fill a vat with 50-year-old whiskey and put half a cask of 3-year-old whiskey in there. And you'd have to say, and this is like what you're saying, is that 40% of this stuff is really, really old.
Fantastic. So I did 12 different casks, as I say. Very briefly, the stuff from 60s and 70s brought the age, and I just wanted that big oomph. I did 80s and 90s, brought a lot of insanely heavy sherry in there. And then I did stuff from the kind of 2000s just to kind of mellow it and cut it slightly, and then 2020s stock. Well, first of all, to be our stock, because obviously Tamdhu has that job. And second of all, just a bit of a fuck you.
That's amazing. Yeah. And do you know what we didn't actually do? We didn't ask Jake what he was dramming at the start of the podcast.
Of course.
Well, they're both gone now.
And actually, what you were having, one of the drams you're having, I picked for you was a blended whiskey, which is called the Over 6-Year-Old.
Yes.
And that also highlights it. So there, you're allowed to put over 6-year-old. They had to put 6-year-old on the bottle because it does have 6-year-old is obviously the youngest whiskey in it, but it's well quick as well.
But I mean, I think when you look at whiskey stories, and I know that this will probably bore the pants off you because the romanticists, you're more on the production side, but you do look back at the point where the Scotch Whisky Association, and they had to come in and say, because what a lot of during the, I think it was like the sort of 40s, 50s, 60s maybe, I don't know the dates precisely, but a lot of whiskey makers were trying to get rid of young stock because there was they'd stockpiled a lot of whiskey. So what they were doing was, and it would say like up to, or they would say like up to 25 years in here, and sort of trying to sell it so they could get rid of young stock at a much higher price than what they would be able to do.
It's such an interesting part of the industry, to be honest. And actually, I want to ask you, and I want to thank you. So I am a big Tamdhu fan, as has been well said in the podcast. But I had probably my favourite ever Glengoyne this year. Yep. And it's Glengoyne White Oak. You know, we tried the 24-year-old and we tried the non-age expression. Yep. I actually thought, I tried the non-age first. I thought the non-age White Oak was an exceptional whiskey. And it's one of those things, I've always drank Glengoyne. I love some of the older expressions. I had the privilege of trying when I was at Scotch. The 30s, a brilliant dram. The 25 and the 21 were massive sellers for us for North American market. People who wanted that Macallan, but something more artisanal, a bit lesser known. But Glengoyne White Oak blew my socks off, and I was almost a little bit annoyed by how much I liked it. You must have been part of the blending team that came up with that.
Yeah, so I mean, it makes me a bit giddy, to be honest, to say it. But so White Oak was nothing that any of us do in the blending team is ever just one of us. Obviously, we all participate in everything we do. But White Oak was a project was for me probably one of the things I'm most fond of because it was the first vatting I got to do where it was...
Hang on 2 seconds, so the camera's just gone off.
Sorry.
Okay, so it was the first vatting that you were involved in then?
Yeah, so it was the first vatting where it was, you know, I was kind of left to my own to just experiment around and mess about with. You know, we were struggling to kind of get a product quite over the line, so it was the first one where I was kind of by myself, got to just mess about with things. And it was... To be all fair to him, John Glass, who, you know, our master blender, he's absolutely brilliant. He doesn't get enough recognition because he's not, you know, he's not a big name and he's not pushed as a face. But God, he's really good at what he does. And it was actually his idea. He was like, oh well, you know, we as a collective decided to finish some stuff in Virgin Oak. So he was like, well, actually we have this as a utilisation. It was bourbon going into it, so. So I took some of that stock, started messing about. I played at different levels. I get quite obsessive when I do vattings. Yeah. I'll change things by literally the percentage. So when I was finishing up for the White Oak, I did something at 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%, 7%, and 8% Virgin Oak, and then picked from that range. I may end up with 5% bang on.
Wow.
On the Virgin Oak on that. But so because of that, it holds a very near and dear to my heart,
and the reaction's also been massive, particularly from whiskey people as well.
When you talk about like the challenges to source casks, and you mentioned about how a lot of distilleries and a lot of people in the industry are having to work around those problems. You know, I may be looking at this completely from the outsider and a cynic's point of view, but you see trends quite heavily happening. You know, with types of finishes. We've seen like Grand Cru, we've seen rum casks, we've seen all these different types.
More Virgin Oak.
Is Virgin Oak going to be, or do you think is something that, and as a blender, is it easy to work with or is it tricky to work with? Well, I'd say Virgin Oak in general, it delivers a lot very quickly, right? But the issue with Virgin Oak is it can come across as almost MDF-y.
Okay.
So for me, a little bit goes a long way. So for me, I wouldn't as much like to release something that's pure Virgin Oak finish, and rather use it as a tool.
Or like pure Virgin Oak maturation.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So that's why you don't see it very often in whiskey. That the reason Virgin Oak is fantastic, and the reason that Jim Beam is great in virgin oak is because Jim Beam only has to be 2 years old.
Yeah.
And so you get so much flavour in such a short period of time. My criticism, having tried full maturation 21, 25-year-old virgin oak whiskies, Ben Riach, we're often criticised for it, but also I like the bravery of we're going to be a bit different.
Yeah.
And Ben Riach always have kind of been, they have floor maltings, they do like the peated Speyside spirit. A 21-year-old single malt Scotch whisky, fully matured in virgin oak, from a consumer and from a blender, you immediately go, well, I know you're not going to be able to hide the virgin oak. And you get a lot of spice from virgin oak, and quite unapologetic spice, and often it can become too woody. I would say I recently bought the Bowmore 19 Phase Yield release from this year. It was 6 years in bourbon and 13 years in virgin oak. And that was bonkers to hear.
So they've gone the other way.
Because that basically gone the other way. And even 6 years of virgin oak it would be an extremely long finish. And it worked for Bowmore because Bowmore works so well in generally Quercus alba, American white oak. It becomes so tropical, so fruity. But it is something that people are still quite cautious with. And it's really nice to see. Well, also because of the colour of Glengoyne, because it was called white oak, and that's not what we're familiar with Glengoyne. It's not what you're familiar with Ian Macleod Distillers. You're so well known for being masters of Oloroso, and being masters of sherry in general because of your relationships in Jerez, which is you're talking about the availability of cask grain, but it's all relationships.
Yeah, and see, so with this with the white oak then, so you're using virgin oak, and you're using.
So bourbon 95%, 5% virgin, just to give it that little bit more.
Yeah.
And it was fun. I mean, so like the twice I've had it on this podcast was we had the standard virgin oak series, but we had then Dario brought in the 24, and it was just incredible. I have to say, it was honestly a dram that's really blown me away. And from a distillery that the only time I'd ever come across Glengoyne before we started doing the podcast was we did the West Highland Way. And walked past it. I thought, there must be a distillery there, and I quite liked whiskey. And we stopped in Balmaha, and we had I asked him, and he says, that's the distillery just down the road there, Glengoyne. I had it, absolutely loved it, and ever since then it's been something that, and it's quite nice. With the greatest respect in the world to the people at Ian Macleod Distillers and Glengoyne, is, as you've said before, there's a lot of people who would drink whiskey, who would say, like, never really heard of Glengoyne, and they would think, like, I'm drinking quite a unique drink here, a whiskey that is quite unique and bespoke, where it's not. I mean, what's the production levels or sort of around
Glengoyne's 1 million litres,
which is still quite small, really, and it's not a small distillery. It's the same as the Isle of Arran.
Tandu's 4, so
and you think of Arran being a small artisanal distillery, they make 1 million litres, and it's quite punchy. It's the most visited distillery centre in Scotland.
I mean, it was like number 1 TripAdvisor for Glasgow,
which is bonkers.
Well, it's just like you mentioned, you can get the bus to work, but I mean,
you get bus to there's very few distilleries you can get bus to. The only other one I ever did was Deanston.
Well, Mike Brown talked about the bus, but the party bus, getting there and getting back. But I mean, to be involved in this, so you've poured us a couple of drams here.
Well, basically, speaking of Mike Brown, I knew he was on this, so I wanted to do him up ever so slightly. So I've given you two. I've given you left and right, basically. So you're left and right. I'll slightly give him a very quick brief nose.
So
what I'll say is, sort of left, going to right. What I'll say is both Lowland style distilleries. I just wanted to highlight a kind of difference between the two. I don't care what your preference is in them, but I just want to show the real difference, right? So what I'd say, your left one is big, tropical, fruity, quite intense, quite dusty, quite interesting. But the right one is, almost spicily taken back and almost quite oaky for what it is.
Left one's very inviting.
I like the left one a lot. Just for anyone who's listening and watching, thinking, "Hang on a minute, Graham, I thought you said you weren't drinking."
Very small. Very
they
small.
are small, but I also did say to my wife before I left, "You're not going to go to labour tonight, are you?" Actually, I don't think
give you the all clear, so
give you the all clear. So
left is like creamy yellow fruits, loads of pears, apples.
Huge, right?
Really super
very big, inviting, quite fresh. The right one, slightly heavier, slightly thicker, oilier, spicier. That sort of.
It is woodier. And these are both cask samples as well, cask strength.
So not cask strength.
Both very fruity, actually.
But obviously, so Mike Brown was on your show, and so he brought you some Rosebank New Make. So I wanted to bring you some actual Rosebank.
Wow.
So your one on your left, that's a 32-year-old Rosebank. The one on your right,
Angus is
And then the one on your right is actually a 28-year-old Littlemill.
Wow. Have you had a Littlemill before?
Never.
So I thought two closed distilleries around about the same old age statements, showing you the difference in maturation.
And actually interesting.
And you brought us a bottle each. For
Sorry, Angus. That is, thank you first and foremost for your generosity.
Wow.
Now, for people that don't know, Littlemill was regarded as the oldest distillery in Scotland that was permanently open. Now, obviously, Glenturret have found their new dates, but it was 1772.
1772.
Which Littlemill was originally founded, and they used to do an old kind of green glass 8-year-old.
It was
in the 80s and 90s, and I've seen it, and the last Littlemill I had was under Chieftain's Malt, which was also an independent bottle.
That is what that is.
Is it?
That is the Chieftain's.
I've had this,
Littlemill.
And it's absolutely gorgeous. And
But
the nose,
bottle 2019 to be fair, but
it's really interesting.
Littlemill.
The nose is a wee bit oakier in comparison to the first one, but you try it and it's like shaved coconut. It is. This is a whiskey that Cameron Ewan will say loved. Will be very polite. He really, really enjoyed it because he was obsessed with this whiskey.
The Littlemill.
The Littlemill.
Well, Littlemill was Rachel from Fragrant Drops. It was one of her 3 drams.
Which one was it? Was it the 8-year-old?
Littlemill 90s.
Yeah, so
I think the story was it was just in the back bar. It was they saw it in the back bar of some wee pub up north.
That is an awesome dram.
Wow.
You will not. I know for a fact that
Angus is absolutely raging at his mum.
I know for a fact that Loch Lomond, who had Littlemill, have less than a couple hundred casks left of this closed distillery, and Gordon MacPhail have a lot and all the rest of it. But an exceptional whiskey. And the Rosebank, so this was the series that you brought out of Rosebank. So Rosebank, of course, was a Diageo distillery, and you bought the kind of naming rights, and now you've reopened it. But this is an Ian Macleod bottled official Rosebank. And you've done 3 of these now as well, haven't you?
I mean, we've done a lot more than that. We've done 3
official releases,
global releases. But obviously we've done things for
private clients,
travel retail. We've done things for Asia,
podcasts,
yada.
I mean,
that looks podcast.
What's a bottle of that stuff? The Rosebank set you back from
I think it was
probably about 3-4 grand.
3,000 or 4,000 pounds.
Yeah,
2 or 3 maybe 2.5.
Well,
Alan Wardrobe will hit you up. So if you want to buy a bottle,
if you want to buy a bottle, go for it. Or just know the right people.
Tastes better like this. I tell you what, if there was 5 flies fell on this one, I'd be scooping them out. That.
And actually,
but I just thought it was interesting to show 2 closed distilleries around the same age.
And I could be wrong. Both triple distilled, I believe. I don't think Littlemill was always triple distilled, or certainly it was triple distilled at one point in its history. Cameron Ewan will pick me up on that. I think it was triple distilled at one point in its history, maybe not at this point, but an absolute treat.
I mean, see when you the camera's gone, I think I'm going to have to play around with that. But see when you taste that, and you get it, you actually do fully understand the Rosebank stuff. But what baffles me about Rosebank is the fact that there were so many people who, whilst Rosebank was around and producing, nobody really, people were like, oh, it's a good drama, enjoy it. Oh, I'm a Rosebank fan. I've got a couple of balls in the house. It's something that I go down to the supermarket and buy.
Yeah. Part of the original Flora and Faunas, which was kind of an understated whiskey series.
And now you're looking at it and going, but I suppose, I dare say, Rosebank at the time were probably not producing that level. Every Rosebank we're drinking now, that's 32 years old. So would Rosebank back in the 80s and 90s have had a 32-year-old single malt release?
No.
So what you were drinking was Rosebank 10.
Rosebank where what Glenkinchie is now.
Yeah.
And so Rosebank and Glenkinchie were both at smaller production and trying to do the same thing, which was kind of bring supply mostly for Hague Dimple. Or Pinch Dimple, as we speak about it. So that's where the decision was made. Glenkinchie was easier to increase the production on, so they closed Rosebank. But also, it's amazing that a new owner is able to bring back that bit of history from that distillery.
And how challenging is that going to be for you guys then?
Are you excited to work with the new liquid from Rosebank?
Yeah, so I think to us one of the most exciting things with IMD is, so I started maybe about 3 months before we fired up the stills. So what's kind of exciting for me is the idea that I could be here from first distillation to first release, you know, and seeing that, and we get sent every run of new make they do.
Yeah.
So we've been seeing it evolve and refined and come through. And we've stored it all. I mean, if you go to our sample room, we've got a drawer full of about 80 different Rosebank new makes.
And tell me, Jake, is it hard if you're getting sent new makes and you're also doing a kind of quality assurance of the production in Rosebank? How difficult is it to nose and do your job with new spirit compared to aged stock?
Yeah, I mean it's a tough one because we do a lot of QA on new make, but ultimately what we would all say and we'd agree with is like we're not distillers.
Yeah.
Like it's fine and well us being like, oh, maybe this is a bit sulfury or this is a bit like as new make is, but I would as much of the opinion that we have, I would say that our distillery managers like Robbie, Malcolm and Sandy all have a far better authority over quality of new make than we do.
And so you're really kind of going, right, it seems consistent enough to me, and I can't wait to see what it's like, and we'll be there to judge it at that second barrier after some maturation.
Our expertise is definitely in the mature spirit side of things. Because you don't realise like new make and whiskey is like two completely different ballgames. Absolutely different kettles of fish, to be honest. But
even like the way that people are filling, I'm sure you might have a different filling trend between Glengoyne, Tamsir, Rosebank. Maybe it's all 63.5, but it's one of those things. These things all matter. For the end product that you're.
No, it's going to be fascinating because you've got to work with that. You've got to be the guy that comes up with the.
I mean, our first cask turned 1 in July.
Yeah, so brilliant.
It's getting there.
So it's not far away. Right. Well, we are sort of fast approaching that period of time where we ask our guest what 3 drams.
Oh, okay.
Now, Jake, you've absolutely treated us tonight, and
well, can I treat you with one more very, very, very quickly?
We can.
Sure. Very, very quickly.
I almost don't want to finish my Littlemill. It has been years since I tried it.
That was absolutely gorgeous. Thank you very much for that.
Well, it's fair. I just want to treat you with one more slightly, niche, bizarre thing.
You're welcome back, by the way.
Aye. In fact, you know what? Let's get you and Mike. Let's get you both in.
So I'll very quickly run this. So again, see what you think. I don't care if you like it or hate it.
I love it. Better than the Japanese bobblehead stuff I've got, I'll be honest with you.
But this is actually a slight throwback to what we were talking about there. So Glengoyne White Oak combination, like 5% bourbon, 5% virgin oak, and actually, funnily enough, that ended up being the same for both the NAS and the 24-year-old. So I thought it would be a little interesting to bring in something you'll probably never try, they'll be interested in. But that is the new oak component of the 24-year-old.
So this is the full.
So that's 24-year-old full maturation Glengoyne in virgin oak.
In virgin oak.
Yeah.
So you can.
It's intense.
You get. I mean, it's nice.
But this is why I wouldn't ever do that as what it is.
This would never be bought as a single cask, but it can be.
But as an ingredient, it's a whole different ballgame.
An amazing component.
Right. And what's so special about that as an ingredient then for you?
So where bourbon is a bit smoother, it's a bit more rounded. It brings the big tropical fruits. This just brings that little bit of oomph. It just brings that little bit of mouthfeel. It brings
spice and texture.
The spice,
exactly what I was going to say.
But also like the colour. I mean, it always goes back to.
It's pretty.
You would ask.
But also that's sitting at 64.7, so that's pretty.
But you could ask a straw poll there and ask what cask maturation do you think that is, and the majority of people would look at it and even taste it a little bit and say that's got to be sherry.
Yeah.
And
because of the spice.
I think that's an important fact that Mark Thompson brought it up in a tasting that he hosted that you guys put on at the Balmoral, and it was Glenfiddich at the time, and one of the casks was a virgin oak cask, and everyone in the room sat there and was like, that's got to be a sherry. And one of the important things is like it was European oak, so you're still getting, and it's a really interesting one to see when you see a sherry cask and you see a sherry cask whiskey. You automatically just think, the whole flavour is coming from the sherry, which is a dangerous place to be, because you don't want it just to be over sherried. Whereas actually, it's like if you were to line up a sherry, just a PX or an Oloroso dram beside that one, and taste the difference, there will be so many similar notes that you're getting that you suddenly go, actually, that's not sherry, that's just wood. That's coming from the cask, rather than just coming from the sherry that's in it.
And you don't realise how much a second fill takes away from the cask. Because ultimately with whiskey maturation, it's not about See, when you're going into sherry cask, you're going into bourbon cask and stuff. You really got to get out the mindset of it's not what the sherry is giving you; it's about what the sherry is taking out of the wood.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because ultimately, sherry doesn't mature whiskey; wood matures whiskey.
And just
that's a fascinating
stories,
subject.
do you have a wood management team that cover all of Ian Macleod Distillers?
Yeah, that's us.
You're part of wood management. We're going to have to do another podcast.
That's it. We could do another podcast. I had a really good conversation with Sandy McIntyre, and obviously Tamdu are really, really proud of using Oloroso. Yep. Almost exclusively first and second. And we say almost exclusive. He said 98%. But occasionally he'd point out in the warehouse and say, that's a refill because it had like a red ring on it or something like that. And he said, because it must still be exceptional. It must still be of that level. Yeah. And so is it a hard thing for you to judge? Is that when you're getting a cask for a vatting and then after you've emptied it, you're looking at a cask going, that can still be used? How do you judge that? Because there's no liquid. Well, you can judge it off the liquid, but actually you need to look at the wood.
Yeah, but this is part of the benefit of like when we go sample the cask ourselves. Not only are we looking at the liquid, but we're getting to look at the cask, and you can tell a lot about a cask, by a whiskey, by looking at the cask itself. So master. So that's our red enders. So if we deem a sherry good to go on again, we'll paint the end of it red.
I think people will want to listen to that. So I think when next time we have somebody involved in oak or somebody involved in casks, and we'll get you back on, we can talk about kind of a blender's perspective of reusing casks. It'd be really interesting.
So just three of us. So we do the whole shebang.
Absolutely.
Blending the wood and all.
I mean, that's an incredible dram, and thank you so much.
That's all right.
For that.
That's really interesting.
But yes, we are fast approaching the time that we will get forced out of here for the fiddlers to come in and play their music. We do need to do a collaboration podcast with them one night. Right, so Jake, what 3 drams?
Right, okay, so you know what? I think I've probably mentioned them all throughout this. I'd probably go first of all, Farkless 15. Right, great because straight up, it was the first whiskey that got me into whiskey.
Eye-opening for you. Eureka whiskey, that's what they call it.
Yeah, and I would say batches are slightly inconsistent, but the core of Farkless 15 has always been it for me. It's been a quintessential sherry with Speyside.
46% as well.
It is lovely.
It's just a bit more generous for the rest of the range. And
it's absolutely amazing. So Farkless 15. Second of all, I have to go for the whiskey that we made through my dissertation because it's such a unique experience. You don't really hear about that very much. And as I say, there's maybe about 230 bottles.
So what do we name that? Because I've got to write this down.
I think it's called Blender's Room.
Blender's Room
Release 1 Harriet Watson. Something along those lines. And for the third one, I've been tossing between this.
It's going to be in Alex Thompson's house.
I like to say in Alex Thompson's house, but I think just for personal progression reasons, White Oak NAS. I know you said on brand, but just for me personally, it's what's evolved into. And seeing people love it, and that's given me so much great feedback. Yeah. It's felt great for months.
I actually prefer the White Oak non-age statement.
Yeah, so it's just been great to hear.
So that's why the Glengoyne White Oak non-age statement.
Yeah, probably
is what you.
Yeah, and we hope to then have that as a core range from here on. So.
And if you're chucking in a bonus dram of like an amazing, you're working with a brand and you're in one of the warehouses, blah blah blah, go and tell us a story of drinking a whiskey with one of these amazing people you work with.
So, I have a funny bit where working in blending has ironically opened my eyes up to so much of the whiskey world, but also absolutely crushed my value of whiskey. Right, where I now to the point. I rarely buy whiskey now, generally.
Yeah.
Because I'm around it every day, so it's such a big thing. But the real turning point for me was I walked into work one day. I was maybe like 3 or 4 months in the job. And John turned around to me and Emma and was like, okay, right, so to start today, 9 a.m, 9:30, something like that. He was like, so starting today off, by the way, we're nosing 3 50-year-old Farklesses. Because we're deciding what we're trading. So he was like, I've just set them up in the sample room to just go and give a nose. And at this point, I was still quite new to it, so I was like, what the fuck? It blew my mind. But just, as I say, I don't think anything will top the experiences I get to do at work.
Yeah.
Okay, well, no, I'll maybe rewind that slightly. Where I'm away over to Islay in a couple of weeks. Nice. When I first went to Islay with the group of friends and went back with us as a reunion, sitting on Lagavulin Bay, fishing, with Lagavulin in hand, that's pretty special. Actually, that's pretty fucking.
I mean, that's one of the things. Like, you know, we talked about it having the environment that you're in, the circumstances you're in,
matters most.
And I think a lot of people like going to Islay, that smoky flavour, but being on the beach or being out fishing, it hits different.
It really does hit different.
No, those are fantastic, absolutely fantastic 3 drams. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for sharing those those drams with us.
I hope you enjoyed the whiskies.
And so that's basically it. That's it. Big thanks to Jake for coming on. Thanks to Ross. And thank you so much to Mrs. Shepherd for having her birthday tonight, so I missed it, so that we can have more of the whiskey that Jake brought in for us to share. Well, thank you so much for everybody who's been commenting in on our posts. Thanks for so many people, for everybody who's been engaging with us on social media. Don't forget, you can find us with the Whisky Stories Pod on Instagram. You can find the Whisky Stories Facebook group is popping off. It's brilliant. There's about 60 members on there.
But it's so active.
It's very active. It's great. We're really enjoying the mystery distillery that we do. We do the dram roll call every weekend dram roll call, seeing what everyone's drinking. Big shout out to, is it Laird?
Yes,
Laird. Brilliant.
Unbelievable knowledge.
Excellent knowledge.
Excellent
knowledge. So big shout out to Laird as well. Don't forget to just like, subscribe, and also keep listening, because tomorrow, as we are recording, tomorrow is our very first live event. Our live podcast event that we are doing at the Kilderkin pub. It is our first indie bottler spotlight. Easy for me to say after a couple of drams and a Guinness 0-0. Our indie bottler spotlight with Woody and Megan from Woodrow's of Edinburgh. Tickets, if you're listening to this, it's gone already. So we've got about 20 folk coming along to the Kilderkin tomorrow night to enjoy a live podcast tasting bonanza.
We'll see what it is.
No idea how we're going to do it. I've got to get home, edit this podcast, and try and work out how the hell we're going to get that. But Jake, thank you so much for coming on.
Mate.
Thanks much, guys.
Ross, show us this wee guy again, nodding his head away. That's our Angus. Thanks very much, guys. Cheers. All the best, and thanks again, Jake. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.